GoldBroker.com own real physical gold and silver bars stored outside of the banking system.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dan Popescu, and on behalf of GoldBroker.com, I have the pleasure today to have as a guest Chris Powell, Secretary Treasurer of Gold Antitrust Action Committee, also a journalist who's done an incredible work in digging information about the gold market, especially the manipulation done by central banks and the Fed. I always admired him. I'm always surprised, Chris. First of all, hello.
Hello.
I'm always surprised, and it's been my incredible surprise when I read some of the documents that you bring out about manipulation, and very often by central bankers themselves, from Volcker or Greenspan and others, that the response that comes, it's never attacking the content or the message of those texts. It's more some accusations of conspiracy theory. Rather than, I always look for somebody to give an argument and to say, okay, I'm reading this document and I don't agree with it, but it never comes. It seems to be quiet. Why?
I don't think the documents can be argued with, Dan. I really try to get people to tell me, are these documents genuine or are they forgeries? It'll be very interested if they're forgeries, because many of them are, remain on government agency internet sites. So if they're forgeries, the government has forged them. So are they real or are they forgeries? And if they're real, what are the public policy implications from them? Are they being construed accurately by GATA, or are we misconstruing them? But you're right. Nobody can address these. I think they cannot be addressed because they are genuine, and they demonstrate a long-standing Western central bank policy, very candid policy in the government archives, to push gold out of the financial system and to discourage people from recognizing it as an independent currency. Why can't we get financial journalists interested in these documents and this policy? Why can't we get gold mining executives themselves interested in it? Well, I can only speculate on that, and I'd be glad to. But most of all, we collect the documents here at GATA, and we publicize them, and we clamor about them, and we urge people to look at them and draw their own conclusions. No one so far denies the authenticity of these documents. In fact, I find lately, Dan, nobody can discuss these things at all because they're just so incriminating. And if they get looked at, then the scales have to fall from people's eyes.
Now, Chris, you're a journalist yourself, so you must know how the profession works. I find the accusations of conspiracy theory and that the journalists are not supposed to discuss it, it doesn't really make sense to me. I'm old enough to remember the 70s when from CNN, there was no CNN, but CBS, ABC, NBC, you had inquiries into UFOs on a constant basis in the New York Times or all the major magazines doing. And for me, that's the role of a journalist. You investigate, and then you have an article denying the allegation, saying it was just a conspiracy and I just proved it, or you confirm it, like the Watergate. It was at the beginning, it was a conspiracy. They investigated and they came out with the conclusion that there is something to go even further than that. And they did it. The Washington Post did it. Why, when it comes to gold, I see you on different television stations, very often the moment you bring the subject up, they say we cannot get into it. Why?
I think it's too sensitive to Western governments, and the control of the gold market, the rigging of the gold market, is part of the rigging of all markets generally. It is a monster scheme of expropriation of the whole world. It's a conspiracy against democracy. And there's nothing wrong with the word conspiracy here, as you suggest. There's conspiracy theory and there's conspiracy fact. We have collected the documentation of conspiracy fact. For example, when the European Central Bank meets secretly to discuss the policy toward gold of all its member banks and puts out a press release periodically saying that the bankers have met secretly to coordinate their gold policies and have decided to do the following. That's conspiracy fact. They don't invite you to those meetings. They don't invite me to those meetings, but the secret meetings to coordinate policy, to decide on a course of action, that is the definition of conspiracy. When, for example, the G10 Gold and Foreign Exchange Committee meets at a secret location on a secret date, they don't invite you, they don't invite me, and they do the same thing. They coordinate Western central bank policy toward gold, and they implement it in secret. That is, by definition, conspiracy, except it's conspiracy fact. It's not conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory is just a very cheap and lazy way of disparaging people who are trying to raise an issue that certain people don't want to talk about.
Do you have some information, or when you speak with people about those meetings, do you think there is a coordination right now of all the central banks who usually meet, I think, once a month in Basel to manipulate the price of gold, or is already kind of a fight between the East and the West? In other words, the Chinese are they part of the negotiations of those meetings? Is this manipulation of the gold price? Is there now a split between countries like Russia and China versus the European Union, Great Britain, and United States?
Well, there's certainly evidence of a split among central bankers, but do central bankers conspire about gold? Of course. The Bank for International Settlements is a venue for a lot of conspiracy among central bankers. The central bankers meet at BIS headquarters in Basel from time to time, and they settle on a course of action. Well, that is by definition conspiracy. The press is not invited. There's no public record of the meeting published. So yeah, that's conspiracy. But we know from statements in the Russian and Chinese press that certainly the Eastern central bankers are not as enthusiastic about the long history of gold price suppression as the Western central bankers are. There's constant commentary in the government-controlled Chinese press about gold price suppression in the West, gold price suppression having been undertaken to support the U.S. dollar and to really push U.S. supremacy over the rest of the world. I'm not sure how much the Eastern central bankers are involved in gold price suppression right now. I know a couple of American economists, Lee Quaintance and Paul Brodsky, wrote a paper a couple of years ago speculating that all the major central banks right now are engaged in a surreptitious redistribution of world gold supply so that the central banks that have huge disproportionate surpluses in U.S. dollar denominated instruments can hedge themselves with gold. Now, I think that's informed speculation. It's very plausible, but I don't have the documentation of that. GATA has the documentation of the long-standing Western central bank policy to suppress the gold price, largely through surreptitious interventions in the market, sometimes through distorting of official central bank gold reserves, sometimes through the sale of futures and options through the Bank for International Settlements. You can just go into the Bank for International Settlements' annual report, and you will find that the BIS acknowledges that it is the gold broker for central banks and it's buying and selling gold on their behalf, but not just gold. It's buying and selling gold futures and options. Now, the only purpose of selling gold futures and options when you're a central bank is to affect the price. The director of market operations for the Banque de France, the French central bank, Alexander Gautier, gave a speech to the London Bullion Market Association meeting in Rome in September 2013, in which he said the Banque de France is active in the gold market, is trading gold nearly every day, he said, for its own account and for the account of other central banks. He spoke at a LBMA meeting in Lima, Peru a few months ago, in which he said that the central banks are managing their gold reserves more aggressively. That is, the Gautier told the LBMA on behalf of all these Western central banks that central banks are very aggressive in the gold market now. Now, GoldBroker's own CEO, Fabrice Drouin-Ristori, sent an email a few days ago to Gautier, the director of market operations for the Banque de France, to ask him for some information about these gold transactions by the Banque de France and what are their purposes, who are their counterparties. And yesterday, the French central banker wrote him back saying, "Oh, we never talk about this stuff, and we hardly ever give interviews, and Happy New Year," which was a very polite way of telling him to go drop dead. Now, what Ristori did on GoldBroker's behalf, I think, was really tremendous. He cornered a central banker and said, "Would you please tell us about your gold transactions?" And he got the central banker to tell him, "Oh, no, we never disclose any of this stuff." I've urged Fabrice to go back to Gautier and ask him, "Well, why don't you disclose it?" Now, I know what the answer is. I mean, the answer is the central banks don't disclose their surreptitious interventions in the gold market and other markets with their foreign exchange reserves because the purpose of those interventions is to rig the markets and to deceive investors. Nevertheless, this dialogue with central banks now is something I've always dearly wanted to get started. I'm always peppering mainstream financial journalists with these documents and urging them to put a few specific questions to central bankers about their market interventions. If you frame the questions correctly, as Fabrice did last week, you get the central bankers unable to answer, and then you can draw your own conclusions that the central banks are doing something in the market that they don't want the markets to know, that these central banks, while they are the agencies of nominally democratic governments, they are destroying markets in secret. They are destroying government by undertaking an enormously important public policy in secret. There's no doubt about this, but it can continue only insofar as it's secret. If the financial press ever gets onto this, if it ever starts pressing the central bankers for answers, if the financial press ever starts reporting that central bankers refuse to answer about their comprehensive interventions in the market, then I think the scheme fails. But only when the world becomes aware of it. The power of central banking is usually assumed to be the power to create infinite money. But I think central banking has a much greater power than that, and that's the complicity of the financial press not to report what central banking is doing. If central banking is ever exposed for what it is doing, central banking will lose most of its power.
That's why I was asking you, because you're also a journalist. That surprised me the most is how much the majority of the journalists are not. I thought that if I would be a journalist, I would jump on the possibility of a topic like that. It would be an investigative reporting type of a dream type of project to do, and I'm surprised of the silence. In Europe as much as in the United States.
Dan, I hector maybe 30 financial journalists and financial newsletter writers every week with new documentation, new possible questions for central banks. Just an hour or so ago, I sent them Fabrice's correspondence with the French central banker saying, look, the French central bank has just made it very easy for you. He says, we intervene in markets secretly, and we don't tell anybody about what we're doing, and we hardly ever give interviews. Well, this is a confession. He practically wrote the story for them. All they have to do is copy the correspondence, maybe put a few specific questions to the central bankers themselves. The story has been done. The documentation has been provided to them by GATA many times. The response I get from the financial journalists is very infrequent. I mean, I can tell you, whoever is on vacation at the Financial Times or Reuters or Bloomberg News or the Telegraph or the Wall Street Journal, because the only responses I get from them is when they set their email on auto-respond saying that they'll be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's for the general public. I think they have an obligation to at least investigate and deny the accusations. If it's an accusation, you just investigate it and then you come out with an answer and you say, okay, the story doesn't make sense or the story is genuine. And that's what always surprised me. And I have great admiration for the work that you're doing. You bring a lot of documents to light. Sometimes the information was there, but nobody went through all those thousands of pages to read it. And I always admired you for that. Thank you, Chris, for this interview. It was a pleasure to speak to you. And on behalf of GoldBroker.com, I would like to thank you very much.
No, thank you, Dan, and thanks to Fabrice for his work today. I think he struck a very powerful blow against the unaccountability of Western central banking.
Thank you, Chris. Have a nice year.
Let's hope it's better for all of us.
Yeah, thank you.